But I just want to welcome everybody here. My name is Carlin Tucker, and I'm honored to be the chairperson of the board of directors that serves the citizens of Metropolitan Detroit. And since I'm the incoming board chair, I'm going to take some liberties and just, before I do the meeting opening, I want to share something with all of you all that really just talks about how important the work is of our organization and organizations like ours across the country. I have a son. You're not going to believe this. My baby son is 30 years old. I know, I look 30 myself. Well, anyway, my son is a transplant to California. He now considers himself a Californian because he's been out there for 2 years. He's been out of my pocket for a year, so he's doing all right. But he's a mortgage broker. So he's wheeling and dealing with the big mortgages. He's able to pay his rent out there, take care of himself. But he also, like a lot of young people today, have changed jobs numerous times. But he's worked for this particular mortgage company for about 6 months. He's been doing well. He had a very good month last month. My grandson and I went out there, and he even picked up the tab every night we went out to dinner. So he's doing all right. But anyway, he calls me today at work. He never calls me during the day, never. So I figured, oh, you know, when for those of you that have adult children, when they call you, look at your phone. Oh, what now? But he says, Mom, before you say anything, listen to what I have to say. He says, just speak, just listen. He says, I want to tell you, I was dismissed from my job 2 days ago. I want to tell you what happened. He says, we were in a staff meeting reviewing all the mortgages with the team leader who happens to be the company vice president. During this meeting, and all of them have a really good relationship, and he thought it was a great place to work. He really loved all his colleagues, and he even admired and respected his boss. But during this meeting, the boss is talking to everyone about the mortgages, that they're yet the pending deals, and he looks at him and says, my nigga, I want you to take care of this. He said this in the meeting. So my son was first shocked. He's like, did I hear him right? So he didn't say anything. They kept on the conversation. Then he said it to him again. Scott, my nigga, I need you to follow up with this. So a couple of co-workers looked at him. Now in the room are 2 black males, the vice president, a white male, 2 females, 1 Hispanic, 1 white, and there was also a Hispanic or somebody of mixed descent. He just didn't know. But they're all like looking at him like, what? And he said he was just like too shocked because he just didn't believe that the person said this to him. So after the meeting, he went back to his desk. But as he started thinking about it, then one of his coworkers said, man, did you hear what he said to you? He's like, yes, don't talk to me about it. But he was still fuming. So he left work, texted his boss the next day and said, hey, what time are you getting in the office? Because they were both early morning people. They would get in like 7:30, 8 o'clock. He's like, I want to come talk to you. So my son, whose name is Scott, went and talked to him, and he said, I want to let you know that that really offended me. He says, you don't know me like that. He says, and maybe you don't know this, and maybe you didn't intend for this, but my perception was that that was very offensive. And it was not professional, and I don't appreciate you talking to me like that. So the guy says, oh man, we're cool. I didn't mean anything, but if you're so upset, you know what, just take the rest of the day off, and I'm not even going to charge your PTO time. So my son Scott did not leave. He went back to his cubicle, started working, but he's still getting angrier and angrier. So he called his boss' office, left a voicemail, says, I'm going to take your advice. I'm going to go ahead, clear my head, I'll be back in the morning. Well, he decided to go and talk to an attorney, which he did. So he immediately texted him, he called him, he sent him an email and asked to meet with him in the morning. But he also sent the same email to the head of HR, their HR vice president, and said he wanted to lodge a formal complaint. When he goes into work the next day, the vice president of the mortgage company and the vice president of human resources are sitting behind the desk waiting for him. And they said, you know, we understand an incident happened yesterday. But either you can forget about the incident or give us your resignation. And he couldn't believe it. He said, this is the HR person? He said, really? I wanted to lodge a complaint. This is harassment. This is discrimination. This is not right. So he cleaned out his desk. He said, I want it clear that I'm not resigning. He called the attorney back. He's made complaints. He's talked to the attorney. He has all his emails. He screenshot all his texts. He said he kept all his documentation of the letters he's gotten of accommodations, of good work. And I'm like, are you okay? I'm so sorry. He's like, Ma, this is 2017. He says, you don't know the amount of hatred that's really going on out here. He said, there's an undercurrent because of what's going on in our country. And I said, are you okay? Are you going to be able to pay your rent in October? He's like, Ma, you've taught me to document and you've taught me to save my money. I'm fine. He's like, I'm walking into another job in 2 weeks. I'm fine. But I'm not going to let this rest because you should not treat people like this. And who knows what else they have said to other people. And people are just afraid to say anything. So I wanted to share that story with you personally because, yes, and I'm going to be frank, it pisses me off that this still goes on. My mother is here in the audience. I'm the daughter of somebody who was a recipient of one of these awards many years ago. So I'm the daughter of a civil rights leader from the 1950s and 60s, and I raised my kids to be aware, to treat people right. And it doesn't matter what color your skin is, the way your hair is, what your sexual orientation is, what your religion is. None of that matters. Everybody's human and you gotta do the right thing. So I know that he's gonna be okay, but I just wanted to share that with you personally because here's a state that you would think is very progressive and receptive to things, but it still goes on in this world. And we all see it every day. So I just acknowledge you for being here because it shows your commitment to that, to what is right. So that kind of leads me, I want to do a spiritual reflection. And it talks about what is right. And this was written, it's from a book of leadership prayers written by Richard Kriegbaum. And when I read this reflection, although we are not a university, but the work we do reminds me of what's spoken about in this reflection. A university colleague once explained that he thought was the key to the dramatic success that we were witnessing. His view was that I had made the university mine, that I had taken personal responsibility for its destiny. In one sense, I understood his meaning and could agree with him, but the experience of freedom and creativity I enjoyed as a president of the university was possible precisely because the university belonged humanly and legally to the board of trustees and to the church and not to me. I had the privilege of proposing things knowing that it was the board's job to stop me whenever they saw that I was about to dive into a pool with no water. I had the liberty to try things knowing that if I failed, the board could choose to hire someone else in my place. But the freedom they gave me made me a better leader. I could practice my stewardship of the university leadership with a light, creative spirit because I did not have to bear the ultimate burden of ownership. It was not my job to make everything work out. Like leaders everywhere, my job was simply to follow the owner's desires and lead, helping to build great people by attempting something difficult and significant together. In a spiritual sense, both the trustees and me at every event, every relationship or decision that we made together or individually all belongs to God. Constantly practicing God's ownership liberates us for creative leadership. We just lead. All the rest is God's business. Unless we are sure of what our starting point is, we can never chart a correct course to our goal. There is no alternative to the freedom and power of the truth. And that is what this organization stands for, is the truth. And there's freedom in that and power. From the book of Philippians in the Bible, chapter 4, verse 8, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right. And that is what we all stand for in this room, what is true and honorable in life. So it is my pleasure to be up here to open up our event this evening and to acknowledge the leaders that share some of these same things and to share our 40th anniversary of leadership. So I just want to thank you all again for being here, and thank you for allowing me that time and to share something personal with you. But I just wanted you to know how important that still is. And for those of you that have adult children, that could be any of your children. That could be any of your daughters, that could be any of your sons. That could be us when we walk out of this room and conduct business. So just please remember that and keep that in your heart, and I just ask you to continue your support of our organization. Thank you. We do have a video that we would like to show.
Let America be America again.
Let it be the dream it used to be.
Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free.
America never was America to me.
Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed.
Let it be that great strong land of love.
Where never kings connive, no tyrants scheme.
That any man be crushed by one above.
It never was America to me.
Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath.
But opportunity is real, and life is free.
Equality is in the air we breathe.
There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free.
Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark?
And who are you that draws your veil across the stars?
I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart.
I am the Negro bearing slavery's scars.
I am the red man driven from the land.
I am the immigrant, clutching the hope I seek.
And finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak.
I am the young man, full of strength and hope.
Tangled in that ancient endless chain of profit, power, gain, and grab the land.
Of grab the gold.
Of grab the ways of satisfying need.
Of work the men.
Of take the pay.
Of owning everything for one's own greed.
I am the farmer, bondsman to the soil.
I am the worker, sold to the machine.
I am the Negro, servant to you all.
I am the people, humble, hungry, mean.
Hungry yet today, despite the dream.
Beaten yet today, O pioneers.
I am the man who never got ahead, the poorest worker bartered through the years.
Yet I'm the one who dreamt our basic dream.
In the old world while still a serf of kings.
Who dreamt a dream so strong, so brave, so true, that even yet its mighty daring sings.
In every brick and stone, in every furrowed turn that's made America the land it has become.
Oh, I'm the man who sailed those early seas in search of what I meant to be my home.
For I'm the one who left dark Ireland's shore, and Poland's plain, and England's grassy lay, and torn from black Africa's strand.
I came to build a homeland of the free. The free?
Who said the free? Not me.
Surely not me.
The millions on relief today.
The millions shot down when we strike.
The millions who have nothing for our pay.
For all the dreams we've dreamed, and all the songs we've sung.
And all the hopes we've held. And all the flags we've hung.
The millions who have nothing for our pay.
Except the dream that's almost dead today.
Oh, let America be America again.
The land that never has been yet.
And yet must be.
The land where every man is free.
The land that's mine. The poor men's, Indians, Negroes, me. Who made America? Whose sweat and blood?
Whose faith and pain? Whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain?
Must bring back our mighty dream again.
Sure. Call me any ugly name you choose.
The steel of freedom does not stain.
From those who live like leeches on the people's lives, we must take back our land again, America.
Oh yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath, America will be.
out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death.
The rape and rot of graft.
And stealth and lies.
We, the people, must redeem the land.
The mines, the plants, the rivers.
The mountains and the endless plain.
All the stretch of these great green states, and make America again.
Wow. And the fact that it was written so long ago, but it is so valid yet today. Well, I'd like to ask my friend and colleague and fellow board member, Ms. Freda Sampson, and I'm catching her as soon as she puts something in her mouth. It would happen like that, Freda. Well, Freda's going to present our first award, so thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
How are you this evening? This nation was built on the promise of equality and opportunity. Delivering on this promise for all people has been an ongoing struggle. We all share a linked fate. As we fulfill the promise, we all benefit. Yet when any individual or group is denied equality and opportunity, we all suffer. Having the courage to examine and understand our history can help build a more just society. Truth provides the foundation for reconciliation. Reconciliation provides the foundation for hope and the promise of an inclusive and supportive future. These are the words penned by our honoree this evening, Peter Hammer. It is the preamble of a Declaration of Intent for Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Metro Detroit, focusing on the impact of housing segregation historically, as well as contemporary outcomes. It's inspired by South Africa, envisioned by the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion, and brought to life by the Housing Project Partnership, a partnership shaped by the wisdom of Cliff Schrupp, Peter Hammer, and many others. And it was that project in 2009 that was my introduction to Peter's brilliance and to his gentleness. And it was also our beginning of a journey as friends. Most of us know Peter's work. We see him on television challenging status quo politicians, at meetings speaking truth to power, and in the community, both listening and speaking to the challenges that so many marginalized individuals and groups face every day. In short, Peter's a rock star. I'm feeling you. But perhaps more accurately, his genius is a blend, a fusion, if you will, of jazz, of gospel, and of the blues. Articulating his gift of teaching through the songs of people who are often voiceless. Now, you know, I'm going to tell you, I was tempted to stand here before you today and read to you his CV. I was tempted. But I made the very wise decision not to, because I know some of us want to get home before the new year, am I right? So instead, I will just give you a glimpse or two of who Peter Hammer is. Peter is a professor of law at Wayne State University and has been since 2003. He is the director of the Damon Keefe Center for Civil Rights, named after our beloved Judge Keefe. We know the Keefe Center. Its work is dedicated to promoting the educational, economic, and political empowerment of underrepresented communities in urban areas. Peter has a JD degree, but wait, there's more. He also has a Ph.D. in economics from the University of Michigan. And just to kind of round that out, he has 3 bachelor's degrees, you know, so it's a nice even fit. He's a smart dude. He's published more journals and textbooks than I can list for you this evening, and he was instrumental in the editing and compiling of Judge Keith's biography, Crusader for Justice. He travels around the world fighting for justice, and in his ability to weave his genius of law and economics through a social justice lens makes him a critical voice in the narrative of fair housing, housing discrimination, and segregation, both then and now. Again, his words. This nation was established on the promise of equality and opportunity. Delivering on this promise for all people is an ongoing struggle. We all share a linked fate. It is my honor, my privilege, and my joy on behalf of the Fair Housing Center and the Board of Directors to present Peter Hammer with his Leadership Award.
I just say one of my favorite people in the world, and it's really going to make me cry. I said just the wonderful things. I just want to first say how touched I was and hurt I was from the story that we heard earlier, and how much pain that kind of brings and continues. But that pain can also be a motivation and a recognition of the struggle that our generation faces and the challenges we have. But in facing that struggle, I want to just express gratitude. Gratitude to the Fair Housing Center and the amazing work, 40 years of doing this, and the different directors and the people who have struggled in this work. Gratitude to one of my mentors, Judge Damon J. Keith, who has been incredibly generous in taking a kid from Eastern Washington and teaching him what it means to do good work in Detroit. Gratitude for my college, John Moak, Professor Moak, who has been doing this work long before I and has been an incredible inspiration. Gratitude to Noel for thinking of us in this position and the work that you're doing for the Fair Housing Center, as many others. Of Margaret, who is the heart and soul of making sure that these things actually take place and that we're addressing the needs. It brought back memories. But I'm a late convert to this work. I've done justice work my whole life, but I hadn't worked in Detroit, and I hadn't done issues of racism in America, which are deep and complex in different ways. And Freda was really one of my mentors in learning how to do that. And that project that we worked on was such an inspiration about to do this thoughtfully, but both with head and with heart, and the legacy that your family brings to this work is incredible. But I'll end the gratitude with Cliff, right? And really thinking that the person who's not here, right? Sort of putting that table out or that placement for Elijah, right? To make sure that is recognized. He was also an amazing mentor and friend, and somebody who would be just patient, right? And giving, right? And willing to just sit down and teach people something new and something different. And again, an inspiration for his life. I think about Judge Keith and think about it's not just what he's done, but how he's lived. And really how much that describes what Cliff has done. So thank you so much. And I think nothing could be more meaningful than an award from this organization, and thinking about Margaret and Cliff, and nothing could be more meaningful than having this introduced by Freda. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the work you're continuing to do, and also the young people whose lives you're touching. Thank you. So now I want to introduce one of my other friends and colleagues on the Fair Housing Board, Ms. Lucy Maddox.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody. Good evening. This is a beautiful event, and we look forward to it every year. That story that Carlin told jogged my memory and reminded me of, I'm about to date myself, growing up in the Civil Rights Movement in Birmingham, Alabama. And when she told that story, several stories just jumped up in my mind. But then when I got to Detrot and started working for the Treasury Department, U.S. Treasury Department, I said U.S. Treasury Department, and by the time you figure out it's IRS, I've gone to another subject. So I told the people, my co-workers, that I had worked with Dr. King in Birmingham, Alabama, and they said to me, well, you won't have those problems up here. You are now up north. So don't worry about having those problems up here. And I thought about that, what they had said to me when I had to file a complaint against IRS because I was the only one in personnel with a college degree, including the supervisor. And I wasn't getting a promotion, and they kept promoting those high school girls from Wyandotte right past me, and I knew right away, having worked with Dr. King, there's something wrong with this picture. So that, I just want to say to Carl, that was a story that I was so familiar with. And if I would tell you some of them, you wouldn't recognize them because half of you in this room was not born during that time. I told you I was dating myself. And when the movement started there, and Dr. King only wanted nonviolent people, I said, oh my God, what am I going to do? And the young members at church said, oh, Miss Maddox, you weren't nonviolent. I said, no, baby, not at that time. I said, I was young then, so I was not nonviolent. So I ended up working in his office because I couldn't sit at lunch counters and let them pour ketchup in my hair and mustard in my hair, and I couldn't walk down the streets and let them spit at me or throw different objects at me. So I ended up in the office with Dr. King, and little did I know at that time that this would be history now, when President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy was calling, asking, getting the status of what was going on in Birmingham every day. And when I was answering the phone and telling Dr. King that you have a call, and you know, we didn't have all this technology we have now. So he had to go where there was a phone when I told him that he had a call. I thank you so much for listening. And I just want to know that was a story that I was so familiar with, and I'm happy that she was able to tell it at this event. Our next honoree is a lifelong resident of Madison Heights and also serves as the governor of that city. He has an extensive and impressive background, so I just kind of pulled out the things that he is doing or has done. Having interned in the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office and volunteered at the U.S. Veterans Legal Clinic. He's a business owner and he operates the law office of Brian C. Hartwell in Madison Heights. The honoree is involved with the community. Just to name a few things, he organized an annual donation for English dictionaries to give to local high school kids. And he also organizes a citywide cleanup of snow and ice at bus stops. Now you know we need that in the wintertime. And for years he has volunteered with the Seniors Center. And this program is Ask a Lawyer. This program provides confidential consultation to low-income seniors. And that is good to have because seniors have lots of legal problems, and he is giving that service. While serving on several committees and performing community services, he still finds time in his busy schedule to handle several cases and complaints here at Detroit Fair Housing Center. Now, isn't that wonderful? All that stuff he's doing, he still work the center in and do several of their cases. Please help me welcome Attorney Brian C. Hartwell.
Thank you to the Fair Housing Center. Thank you, Lucy, for that moving, inspirational story of Dr. King and your work. I want to introduce my guest tonight. I invited my parents, who really inspired everything I do as a lawyer and a politician and as a man. The Fair Housing Center was gracious enough to give me a table, so I thought, who better than inviting the teachers from Madison Heights. In Madison Heights, we have a top 10 high school in Oakland County. It's Madison High School on 11 and John R. And I want to introduce some of their fine teachers here. Jessica, Zach, Caitlin, Elizabeth, and Lee. Will you please recognize yourselves? My household has 2 attorneys, and I'm the lesser of the 2. The other attorney is Kathy Koziel, who represents injured workers and disabled people fighting for their benefits every day, for every day of her career. Kathy, will you recognize? As Lucy said, I'm the mayor of Madison Heights, and I frequently speak at charitable events. And yesterday I spoke to the Kiwanis Club of Troy. And as I was preparing my remarks, I dusted off a couple lines that I give to every speech, is that Madison Heights has 200 Asian-owned businesses, 18% of our residents were born in a foreign country. These are good lines to start any speech as the mayor. But the Kiwanis Club wanted me to talk about housing discrimination because they couldn't believe it happens in their city. So I started the speech by educating the Kiwanis Club about the Fair Housing Act, which is 49 years old, and it was signed by President Johnson in 1968, 1 week after Dr. King was assassinated. I also told the Kiwanis Club that the Fair Housing Act initially prohibited discrimination against race, religion, and national origin, and eventually Congress expanded that to prohibit discrimination against family size, gender, and disability. My law practice represents people who are discriminated against on the basis of mental disability and race. And I closed my speech at the Kiwanis Club by telling them a story of a very wealthy Scottish family named the McGavins, who moved to Troy, Michigan from Long Island, New York to accept a prestigious job at a local university. After having a credit check and passing the employment verification, the McGavins signed a contract to rent to own a beautiful mansion in Troy, Michigan. Beautiful. And on the day they were to move in, they had the moving van in the driveway, the kids in the van. Mr. McGavin entered the house to meet the leasing agent and the seller for the first time to get the keys to his new house. And the seller surprisingly said, oh boy, he looked confused. Mr. Gavin, the house isn't available today. You got to come back tomorrow. Frustrated, Mr. McGavin, he took his family to a hotel. What else could he do? The next morning, Mr. McGavin received a phone call from the leasing agent who said, the seller will not rent to you people unless you submit to criminal background checks. What the seller didn't realize until he met the McGavins in person is that they weren't Scottish, but they're African American. And he just violated the fair housing law by denying housing on the basis of race. That's a case that the Fair Housing Center and my law office are working on. And actually, just this week, I can announce that we've reached some justice for the McGavin family, getting them a sizable penalty against these housing providers. And what made me realize by telling this story to the Kiwanis Club of Troy is that we have a lot of work to do to tell people about what we do. So other families understand the resources that we have access to, so that people of Madison Heights and Troy can learn about what's happening in their neighborhoods, and so that our representatives in Congress understand how important it is to fund the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And, we faced these natural disasters the past month in Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico with major loss of housing, and it's a tragic, epic tragedy. But the loss of housing for one family on the basis of discrimination is also a tragedy. And that's why you and I support the Fair Housing Center. So thank you for this award. It means so much to me. Thank you.
My next person coming up, who is a friend, colleague, and fellow board member, Dr. David Snider. Where did David go?
I think he's here.
I should have on my other glasses, okay. Thank you. Okay, so you ease over to the side. Okay.
a delight to see all of you here tonight. And it's a delight because it feels a lot less alone when you're working these issues and you're in a room when a lot of other people have committed lots of your lives to be working the same issues. And I think about this when I think about our honoring Stephen Henderson for his work at the Detroit Free Press. Judy and I came to Detroit in '72, and there was no way that the kinds of editorials about racism and the president that Stephen is able to write would have appeared in the '70s. And the only place you would find a good analysis of racism was in one of the interfaith centers where Detrot was a director before he became head of the Fair Housing Center, and there were 5 or 6 other regional centers for fair housing in the metropolitan area at that time. And we worked sort of in closets, almost. And the great thing about what Stephen Henderson has done at the Free Press is that he has brought the issue of racism into the public media, and it's just a delightful difference. For example, if you do a Google search for Stephen Henderson at the Detroit Free Press, you'll get this great list of articles, several of them, including excellent analyses of racism that you can use not only to understand better the racism that is involved in Trump's explanation of what he thinks happened at Charlottesville, and Jeff Sessions' sort of different take on it. And Stephen points out how even though Jeff Sessions' take is not as bad as Trump's, it still is completely inadequate. Go there and you'll find a very careful use of the racism term and analysis that will be useful in conversations with other people who don't really have a sense of what racism is. And a lot of those folks will be white like me, because we grew up where you show up white, as I did at Wake Forest College in '57, and open door. If I had been African American, they wouldn't have looked at my application. And to have Stephen where he is, with 2 really excellent people reporting to him on the editorial page board or group at the Free Press, is just a great gift to our region. So one of the ways that you do a lot for us, Stephen, is to create a different environment for us to do our work. I think for people who are experiencing racial injustice, or one of the other people in one of the other protected classes that we support, they find out that yes, it probably is happening to me, rather than, oh, this couldn't be happening to me in 2017. So for people who need our support, it's useful that you are writing as you are about the continuing reality of racism. And for people who are carrying out the racism, and many of whom we have had the opportunity to file court cases against, some of them are settled in court, some are settled in mediation, those people who have been practicing racism and other housing violations know that they got to watch themselves more carefully, and that it can be very costly, and we will do our part to make it cost you a lot if you want to continue this behavior. So you help people who need our help sort of be aware, yeah, it may be happening to me. And you help people who need our help in stopping what they're doing to know you can be stopped, or you'll be dollar-wise very sorry. So those are ways that you change the environment for us. Other ways that you change the environment for us are the kinds of things that you do with Channel 56, your American Black Journal. You bring on people who are working important issues, many of which we are involved in terms of the whole white community-wide, and you give them voice that they would not have if you were not doing what you do. And I love the way you can help people be comfortable when they show up in your hands, and this an educational event that you do every time you do the show. So I thank you for that. I also love how you and Christy McDonald and Nolan Finley are able to move onto statewide issues and address a whole range of important issues, including race and racism in region and in state government. The other place that you are doing work that's important is in creating the Tuxedo House, where you spent many years sometimes living with your father, sometimes visiting him, and you're working to restore that house, but also to restore the neighborhood. So your notion of rebuilding the city one house at a time comes alive, where you spent many hours, many of which were good. The other thing that you do from that is follow your father's memory back to Natchez, Mississippi, and go to the cemetery where he was buried. And Stephen is very curious. After he visited his father's gravesite, he wandered nearby to another cemetery and found the name of another person whose last name was Henderson. Turns out that guy was white, owned many slaves, had a brother who owned lots of slaves, and Stephen's guess is that he probably is a relative, and not a happy memory that this guy may have been a relative. But I appreciate the fact you share that part of who you are. You're wanting to know how you were shaped by all that stuff and sharing it with us. It reminds me of the much lesser challenge that I faced in dealing with my father, who, well, was common white Southern racist. And dealing with a father in that way is nothing like dealing with a family that is slaveholders. But it reminds me that I have my challenges that are much lesser than yours, and you have yours, and it helps me for you to share yours, to know, oh, we got something in common that race shapes us all, whether we expect it to or not. The last thing that you do that is so important is challenging the current president. And you have one comment in your 4th of July article that I want to share. This is 4th of July this year. America has never fulfilled all its promise, but our greatest moments have been about recognition of a core set of do's and don'ts coalesced around a motivating sense of righteousness. We tell ourselves and tell the world that we're bigger than the small inspirations of bald revenge and selfishness, of callous disregard for those who are misfortunate or unlucky. Trump, on the other hand, in nearly everything he does, seeks to reorder that basic American standard. And his call to the rest of us is to follow suit, to step away from believing that we can be fair and just and good. There's no better time than the 4th of July to reassert the principles that not only form our founding, that we can be fair and just and good, but have defined our excellence, and to resist Trump's crass version of American spirit. We thank you for your boldness in challenging their president, but he's still our president. Thank you very much for all you've done.
Thank you, David, for the wonderful introduction. Congratulations to all the other award recipients, of course, and thank you to the Fair Housing Center for having me here, for honoring me. If you'll indulge me, I'm going to tell 3 stories. Give a microphone to an editor and radio host, and you might not get it back. The first story I want to tell is about my father. And David reminds of the sort of journey I've been on in recent years through the house that he lived in here to discover more about what his life was like before he came to Detroit. It's something I didn't really know a whole lot about because my dad died when I was 13, and so now as a middle-aged adult, I'm sort of digging back through all of that and uncovering things. As David points out, my dad was from Natchez, Mississippi. He's born there in 1933. And I want to tell a story that I have told many times when people have challenged me in my assertions that race still matters. As David said, I write an awful lot about race right now, although for the last 10 years, really, I have written pretty consistently about how race still shapes things in our world here in Detroit, in Michigan, and the United States. But lately, of course, I've been more focused on that, I think, because of the climate. It comes up far more than it used to. We have a reminder in the White House of a very different vision of equality than I might embrace, or I'm sure the people in this room. And so lots of people say to me, just stop talking about it, right? You are the person who is bringing this up. And they get pretty quickly to the idea that they say, this doesn't affect your life. You're the editorial page editor of the Free Press. You're the host of this radio show. You're this and you're that. Show me where the racism has any effect. And really it is through that discovery of my father's life that I'm able to answer that question much more bluntly. So my dad is born in 1933 in Natchez, Mississippi, in the middle of a white segregated America. He grows up and signs up to join the Air Force during the Korean War. And so he goes overseas, serves honorably, and is discharged. And he comes home to Natchez that is still segregated. So even though he went and fought on behalf of this nation, he still couldn't vote. He couldn't sit at a lunch counter in downtown Natchez. He didn't benefit from all of the wonderful federal programs that were created to help GIs coming home from the Korean War. So the GI Bill that sent so many to college, he wasn't able to participate in that. The home buying incentives that were created for veterans, he was denied all of those things. And so that shaped his life, right? Opportunity wasn't something that was given him through the lens of equality. Tell that story to say that, this is not some relative I read about in a book in the library. This is the first man I knew, and this is the man who helped to raise me. And so the idea that the injustices that were visited upon him somehow didn't affect my life is pretty absurd. I mean, think of the way in which we think of intergenerational wealth and intergenerational poverty, the way we think of opportunity sort of flowing down from father to son to grandson. In my family, at least, those things were greatly disconnected, and no matter how much I'm able to achieve, as somebody who doesn't live under those direct oppressions now, they still have an effect. They still have an effect on my life. So that's story one. Story two I want to tell is about something that happened this weekend. I was in Washington as a guest panelist on the show Meet the Press, something I've done 4 or 5 times since 2014. This time the subject was race. The subject was the protests that are going on in the NFL, led by Colin Kaepernick, and now attracting the attention of President Donald Trump. We got into an argument about the nature and the appropriateness of what Colin Kaepernick does. And Rich Lowry, who's the editor of the National Review, looked at me as we were debating about whether this was appropriate, and he said, "Are you really saying that the national anthem is racist?" And I paused for a second because I knew at once he was trying to bait me into a comment that would maybe go viral, and my email box would fill up with all kinds of crazy stuff. But I also knew he was being sincere. He was unaware of the very idea that the national anthem might be racist. And so what I said was, the answer to your question is that this is a nation with very, very deep roots in white supremacy and racism. Those roots cast forward into institutions today, and one of those institutions is the national anthem, whose very words, are a reflection of that white supremacy. Now, those aren't the words we stand and sing at football games or other events, but the third verse of the Star-Spangled Banner talks about Francis Scott Key's hope that among the people who will be vanquished in the War of 1812 are hirelings and slaves, people who had escaped slavery and joined the British troops because they felt as though their freedom was more readily accessible through the British side than the American side. If that's not a reflection of white supremacy, I don't know what is. Rich Lowry didn't know that. So many other people didn't know that. I have been inundated over the last few days with emails and Twitter connections, people talking about, you're wrong, I know the words to the Star-Spangled Banner. And I've been sending out links to say, well, you don't know all the words. This is another way that our past shapes the present. There is no way to talk about America today, there is no way to talk about American institutions today without at least acknowledging that so many of them were shaped by racist instincts, by the idea of white supremacy. There are poignant reminders all around us, but the thing I'm learning is that we have to be ever more vigilant in pushing those reminders out there, right? You have to say that these things are true, that these things exist, and rely on the facts and history to carry your point forward. The third thing I want to talk about is housing related, and I think that's appropriate given the subject here. As David mentioned, I'm really deeply involved in this project that centers around the house where I was born, or where my family lived when I was born, here in Detroit in 1970. It's near Livernois and Grand River, near St. Cecilia, which is sort of the last remaining institution in that neighborhood. That house was empty and stripped when I sort of re-engaged with it in 2012, and I've spent the last 5 years trying to sort of reimagine what it could be. I wasn't willing to let it go. I wasn't willing to let the city tear it down. But I also didn't know what could become of it. It's on a block where there are 40 houses and 24 are abandoned. 17 are in the land bank and 6 of them are sort of headed there. And so over the last 5 years, I've really come up with, I think, an interesting way of reimagining that. So I bought the house and got a lot of support from friends and institutions in town to rehab it and reopen it as a literary center and a writer's residence. So there's a college professor from Marygrove who's living there, teaching at the college, using the house as a teaching space for them, also welcoming in the neighbors for literary arts programs, also to interact with the kids from the college. We just opened the house 6 weeks ago, and it's off and running. We're now on our third house on the block. We've torn down one down the block. We're going to tear down another in a few weeks. But as we've become more active in this project and more engaged in the neighborhood, we have started to learn an awful lot about the people who still live there. And the project from the beginning was, the idea of the project was to improve the quality of life for the people who still live in that neighborhood. Some of the things we're learning are real reminders of the legacy of housing discrimination. They are not issues that are about facial discrimination today, but I strongly believe that if you went back far enough, what we would find was that these were people whose families, whose ancestors did not have the kind of opportunity that everybody had. So 2 doors down from us on Tuxedo, which is the street that I lived on, there's a guy named Alan who has lived there since, I don't know, the 50s or the 60s. He probably is among one of the first African Americans, in fact, to be able to buy a house on that block. Like most developments in Detroit, it was built as a whites-only community. It's not until the 50s or the 60s that people start to break those covenants and sell houses to African Americans. Alan's about 81, maybe 82. He's right around the same age that my father would be today if he were alive. Alan's house caught fire 4 or 5 years ago on the second floor. Didn't destroy the house, but it did destroy the second floor, and much of it fell down into the first floor. Alan didn't have insurance, and so he can't make repairs to the house. So since then, he has lived around the wreckage of the second floor on the first floor of his house. I also learned that Alan has no water, Alan has no power. And so he sits most of the day on the front porch. And he walks up and down the block every couple of hours. Now I assume getting water from neighbors. The other day I was out with another neighbor and he came by and she said, "Oh, hang on a second." And she went to the backyard and pulled two big garbage bags full of cans and bottles out and gave them to him. And she said, "Come back Tuesday." So he's collecting cans and bottles, I assume, probably to eat. This is in the middle of, our city. It's in the middle of my block. The idea that someone would spend the last years of his life in that kind of condition is just overwhelming to even think about. If you go to the end of the block, there's a woman named Brittany who lives there with her 2-year-old son, Manny. She's a squatter in the house where she is, and that house has just made its way into the annual tax foreclosure auction that we have here in the city. So somebody may buy that house, put her out of it. Even if they don't buy that house, how can she possibly survive under those conditions? Brittany told us a few weeks ago she's also pregnant. So she's going to have another person to be responsible for. She doesn't work. She doesn't know what to do other than to squat in that house. She can't live in the house that her family owns across the street because her father is there and he sexually assaults her. Again, this is a 26-year-old woman living in our city, on my block, under these circumstances. And there are all kinds of pathologies involved here that I'm not equipped or resourced to deal with. There are all kinds of explanations for why these people live in the conditions that they do. And you could go up and down that block right now and look behind each door and find similar kinds of issues. But one of them, and the one that I think we have to remind ourselves of, is housing discrimination, the history of housing discrimination in this nation and in this city. The tentacles from those institutions reach absolutely into the lives of these people. Brittany and Alan are living examples of the legacy of discrimination in this country. If you go back a few generations for either of them, I think you would find very vivid examples of what that discrimination looked like. And they are a reminder that you can't do that and cast forward that, well, it's all equal now, right? Just because Brittany can't legally be told she can't live somewhere doesn't mean that the history of that happening doesn't affect her life. Alan, who overcame discrimination in the city of Detroit, become a homeowner, now has lost everything. All of these things connect back, and it's a daily reminder for me now, because I'm over there every day. It's the kind of thing that I think all of us need to find ways to remind ourselves of more frequently, and then remind everybody else. Keep talking about these legacies, keep talking about these institutions, and the need to approach the solutions with that history in mind. There are no colorblind answers to these things. We have got to confront the context of discrimination and racism. So I thank you very much for the award, and congratulations again to the other award recipients.
Powerful. Wow. Stephen, please keep up the work. Make sure that America stays woke. Even when you're on national TV, keep them woke. Well, before we go on, I just want to bring to your attention, this is a very special souvenir booklet that you all have. And Stephen talked about history. There's a lot of historic documents in here from the Metropolitan Detroit Fair Housing Center, so we wanted to share some of that history with you. So please, don't take this home and put it in your recycle bin. Keep it, it has a value. And please review it, and some of the articles, it's like the biases, some of the articles you'll see in here from 40 years ago, 30 years ago, they could be written today. So I just want to ask you to keep up with that. And even before I get on, because I know everybody's worked all day, getting ready to leave, want us to wrap this up. But before we go on to our next awardee, I would just like to thank those that sponsored our event to make this possible. So I want to give a special thanks to Dart Properties. Do we have representatives here from Dart? Thank you. I know that we have friends from Associated Management. Thank you so much. America Bank, who takes care of our money. L&R Management Services. And the law offices of Noel Saleh. Thank you. We have a wonderful trio playing, Taslima Bay and Friends. Our photographers, Oxygen Photos, David Watkins. The printers, but also I want to thank my fellow board members, the planning committee that worked hard to make this event possible. Ms. Margaret Brown, our fearless leader, who's been the foundation, and her team. Could I ask all the members of the Fair Housing Center team just to raise their hands, just to be acknowledged one more time? Thank you. And we do acknowledge the Federal Reserve for hooking us up with a nice venue. But now I'm going to go on, but I just want to just thank everybody and also just ask you to keep considering to open up your hearts and your wallets and your checkbooks to the center. It was mentioned earlier, Mayor Hartwell, you mentioned earlier about how HUD is tightening their pocketbooks and HUD funding, government funding. We all know what's going on in the world. And the fair housing centers, just like us, depend on grants from HUD for survival. But that money is tightening up, so we just want to ask for your continued generosity to support this work. So now I'm going to ask my colleagues, John Obie, and I hope I'm not mispronouncing the name, Angela? Angela, I'm sorry, thank you for the correction.
My name is John Obie. I've been around a long time, but the person that we're going to honor tonight, actually there's two people we're going to honor tonight, and I want them next to me because I love these folks.
We love you too.
The heart, somebody made this comment before, the heart and soul of the Fair Housing Center are the testers. Our friend, our mentor, the person that none of us would be here, Cliff Shrub, wrote a letter to our honoree tonight, and I really consider this honor to both the husband and wife here. And he wrote these words in 2006. Everyone associated with the Fair Housing Center knows that without the dedicated efforts of our testers, we may as well close the center. Our cooperating attorneys know that. The judges who have heard Fair Housing Center cases know that. And even defense attorneys who have tried to discredit the testimony of testers know of the important work that testers perform. I love the fact that I get the chance to honor testers because among this group here, there are probably other testers who are unidentified, nameless, and unknown. And tonight I get to honor a tester and his wife who are here virtually from the very beginning of the Fair Housing Center. Jim Pierson and his wife, Cindy. Jim and Cindy have been involved in social justice issues their entire lives. In 1979, 2 years after the center was founded, Cindy was at a conference of a roundtable of Christians and Jews and met Cliff Schrupp. And so began their involvement from that time to the present. And I can say most of us who met Cliff became involved and never were able to get away. One of the interesting things that I learned some years ago is that Jim, who was a math teacher in the city of Detroit, actually taught two of Cliff's children while he was a middle school teacher at Ludington Middle School. Well, both Jim and Cindy were involved in testing. I looked at Jim's file with the Fair Housing Center, and except for one other former client and tester who was in the room here tonight, he probably performed more tests than any other tester, any other single tester in the history of the Fair Housing Center. He was often teamed with a fellow teacher, Larry Wall, who Jim recruited to become a tester. They tested throughout the metropolitan area, and often the cases that they tested were very high profile, and they were called to testify. Not only does a tester need to have the skills as a tester, but they also need the skills of testifying. I first met Jim and Larry when both testified in the River House Cooperative case. Their styles were very different. Jim was very effusive, Larry quieter, but both were effective and controlled. There is an art and a science to being a tester. And Jim's skills showed themselves in a second matter that I had in which Jim was a tester. As I was deposing the manager of an apartment complex in Westland, who had declined to give her name when Jim tested the complex, I had Jim's test report in front of me. I had it in my lap. I looked at the woman I was deposing, and she was indeed scrawny. She had dirty dishwater blonde hair. She was gap-toothed. You wrote this. And she had a southern accent. Jim described her to a T, and no one else could have fit that description. As I told you, it's not just a science, it's an art. Thanks to Jim's efforts, the River House case settled for $235,000, and that cooperative, which had been on the riverfront from the early 50s until the early 90s, became an integrated facility for the first time in that history. In the second case that I talked about with the unidentified manager who was very identified by description, my clients were able to obtain a settlement which enabled them to get out of the housing that they were dealing with, the apartment complex, and made a large down payment on a home in Canton. And they were the first black family on that block in the city of Canton. Marv Thomas was the first coordinator of the testing program for the Fair Housing Center. He was a wonderful guy and a quiet, soft-spoken guy who every time I would see him, the first time he would say to me, "How are the Obi kids?" Every single time, that was the first thing he said to me. Marv would be happy to be here, honoring Jim and also Cindy for all the work that they've done for the Fair Housing Center, because indeed they are the heart and soul of our organization, and we would be lost without them. Jim?
Hello, I'm Engela Bertolini, the coordinator of Systemic Investigations. And I just want to tell you that I can't imagine the day Jim called me to inform me that he's retiring from testing. I asked him 3 times, "What did you say?" before I could even respond. And I know after that I had myself a little pity party before I even mentioned it to the staff and to our director, Margaret Brown. It's like I was saddened. It's like you lose a family member. The testers, for those who are here, we deeply appreciate what you are doing. You are the pulse of the organization. Jim, you have been awesome all the way. Jim lives in Ann Arbor, but he will do tests for us in Detroit anytime. Every now and then I had to ask for those reports though, but I do get them out in the mail. So again, Jim, we really appreciate all your years of service and dedication to the Fair Housing Center. You will always be in our thoughts and in our hearts. Any of you who want to become testers, please call us. We need you. Thanks.
Yes, occasionally a few of my tests did go a couple of days past the desired turn-in date, but then Angela called and put the proverbial fear of Angela into me in a very, very kind way. I've heard some very disturbing stories tonight, and stories that have made me angry. But quoting a passage from a letter from Birmingham jail, you know who wrote that? Dr. King said, "The prophet's greatest gift to humanity is the discovery of the evil of indifference." And I totally believe that everyone here tonight who has heard these stories is angry. But I am also totally convinced that everyone's anger here tonight is a directed anger. A directed anger to a new commitment. So I applaud everyone who shared their experiences and the experience of their loved ones tonight. I would like to acknowledge my fellow honorees whose humanitarian actions have really inspired us all. I would like to acknowledge my wonderfully supportive friends and family who have helped me along the path of becoming the person I really am trying to be. And I would like to acknowledge Cindy, my beautiful, loving wife of 49 years. She has an incredible degree of tolerance. She spent over 30 years, a lot of people don't know about this, she spent over 30 years as a very, very caring social worker with the Michigan prison system. However, whenever I have asked if she would ever consider being my therapist, she has persistently declared without hesitation, "Sorry, I really think you're beyond hope." Finally, I would like to acknowledge all of the Fair Housing Center staff. Many I know very well, a few I'm just getting to know tonight. The attorneys, the real estate professionals, and those as yet uncloaked testers who continue their critical work to vanquish the recurring evil of housing discrimination. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When Angela asked me to share some thoughts upon my acceptance of this esteemed award, I thought that if I were allowed to speak for an hour, I could do that easily, extemporaneously, because I have been involved for a long time, and I have a lot of thoughts on this. But if I were to condense my many years of work into 5 minutes or so, well, that's going to take a little longer to prepare. Fortunately, Angela is giving me an adequate amount of time. a very, very brief personal history. I was born in Detroit at a very, very young age. Thus, I don't remember much of the discrimination that was occurring during the 40s. Although the D was, and sadly to this day, and I've checked my data, my maps, before I made this statement, one of the country's most racially divided large metropolitan areas, in spite of our many successes. I do remember, as a young child in my home with my dear parents, there was an absence of any derisive words. There was a lack of any signs of prejudice. As a child of about 8, however, I also remember my uncle telling me why the mayor of Dearborn had large concrete barriers erected at the end of my uncle's street that used to lead to Inkster. I do remember as a 10-year-old, my best friend telling me why his parents spent so much time volunteering with our Northwest Detroit Neighborhood Association, the Schoolcraft Improvement Association. My friend said, with a strange sense of pride, that his parents were working hard to keep them out. I do remember as a young romantic teen being moved by the beauty of the film South Pacific. But in that classic musical, perhaps I was most influenced by these lyrics of Oscar Hammerstein. We are not born thinking like that. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. I am a beneficiary of the existence of white privilege. I have benefited in countless ways, and I abhor its existence. I do understand the anger of and the reasons for the actions of Huey Newton, Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown. I admire the incredible power of the nonviolent determination of Dr. King, Senator John Lewis, Clifford Schrupp, and Marvin Thomas. Cindy introduced me to Cliff, and I think it was about 1980, after she met him while organizing our Rearing Children of Goodwill Conference. Cliff wasted little time, as was his style, in inviting us to be testers, and the rest is history. I remember Cliff being asked by me one day if he would ever consider practicing law or teaching when the Fair Housing Center fulfilled its mission. Well, Cliff chuckled, gave that wry smile we all knew so well, and responded, I think we're going to be around here for quite a while. Paulo Freire, in his monumental treatise, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, discusses how to help people use their own knowledge and their own experience to bring about positive change in their own lives. As mentors with the Fair Housing Center, we, the collective we, have helped innumerable victims of discrimination acquire the tools and gain the power to obtain decent housing. Today, as we strive to cultivate human dignity, yes, we are angered by frequent acts of discrimination that pop up like poisonous mushrooms. As we sow the fields of justice with strength of commitment and seeds of kindness, we repeatedly encounter rocks of prejudice and boulders of hate. It is then we might recall the words of martial arts legend Bruce Lee. Be like water, my friend. As a stream learns how to get around a seemingly immovable object, that same persistent stream will eventually wear down and wash away that barrier. Similarly, paraphrasing the book of Amos, chapter 5, verse 24, Dr. King said, "Do not be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness becomes like a mighty stream." When Angela emailed me asking me to explain why I continued to test for over 35 years, I was home watching a Netflix movie about the life of Nat Turner. The film detailed the horrific events of hundreds of years of slavery and oppression that African Americans had endured. And now, in addition to their continued discrimination, almost daily we hear of how our Hispanic and Muslim sisters and brothers are being mistreated. Every single time I tested, every single time I was deposed, every single time I testified in court, I was reminded of these injustices. Time and again, I was inspired to do what I could do to neutralize these assaults on human dignity. In accepting the Marvin Thomas Award recognizing my years of service, I feel thankful and a little old. But when recalling Cliff's prophetic words, I think we're going to be around here for quite a while. I know there is still very much work to be done. As the wise soprano, actress, and author Dorothy Sarnoff once said, make sure you have stopped speaking before your audience has stopped listening. So, here are my final thoughts. Although I might not be defined as particularly religious, I do believe that every day God gives us at least one opportunity to serve those in need and to right the wrong lessons that some have been taught. I believe that each day we have at least one chance to add a brick to the citadel of justice, and in so doing declare, si se puede, naham nas tatia. Yes, we can. I am truly grateful for this award and particularly humbled by sharing this prestigious venue with those warriors of righteousness. But before I officially retire from this form of fair housing work, and I'm only retiring from this form, I want you all to know one thing. Whenever I view this very special award, which will be prominently displayed in my home, in our home, I will think of the countless contributions made by namesake Marv, founder Cliff, and the current Fair Housing Center staff. I will also think of you, committed attorneys, you, honorable real estate professionals, and you, unnamed testers, who carry on the fight to finally end housing discrimination. In my heart, I share this award with each of you.
The evening was still powerful, very powerful. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your years of service.
Thank you for coming. We appreciate you sharing the evening with us.